My name is Lisa Blunt Rochester, and I am a congressional candidate here in the state of Delaware. I will tell you that tonight is a very important night. This debate, for me, is probably one of the most important because we are not just talking about Delaware and representing Delaware, but we're also talking about our country and the world. And so for me, I'm really blessed to have here with me my parents, Ted and Alice Blunt, who this week were married 55 years. So the reason why I bring them up is because my mother reminded me on the way in here that as a little girl, different cultures have always been important to me. It's why over 30-something years ago, I studied international relations as my undergrad degree. It's always been important to me to recognize that we are connected and that if we only knew each other better, maybe we wouldn't experience some of the wars and some of the challenges that we face in our world today. So I will tell you, for me, I've been fortunate to live and travel and work in many places across the world. And in that time, I've also seen many extremes. Extremes of poverty in Ethiopia, also extremes of wealth in Shanghai, where I lived. I've been able to work for kings in Jordan, and also work with orphans in China. And again, it became clear to me that we are connected, and that we are strong by that connection. And for me, it was about creating better communities right here in our own city, the city of Wilmington, where I was CEO of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. And we worked on tough challenges like how to find jobs and how to deal with the achievement gap on education and healthcare and civil rights on the community. As a state, I was fortunate to serve as your Secretary of Labor and also your State Personnel Director, where I got to see what it was like to try to find jobs for individuals, make sure that we had a strong economy, a strong working economy, and what it's like to be the biggest employer in the state and some of the challenges employers face, and also to develop a better world. Better communities, better state, and a better world. Working on King Abdullah's poverty alleviation strategy, advising the Minister of Labor, and also working in China, helping women reinvent themselves. For me, these are not just talking points. This is my life's work. This is my passion. This is part of the purpose. And so in all these roles, one of the things that became very clear is that when we are together, our collective success really depends on all of us, not just some of us, having real opportunities. And that's what my campaign is really about. It's about opportunity. That's it in a nutshell. It's about economic opportunities, which is tied to education, which is tied to crime, which is tied to terrorism. It is tied to so many things. And so I'm excited to be here tonight, and I'm excited for the conversation. And I thank you so much for hosting, and I look forward to the debate.
And I look forward to doing so effectively on financial services.
I love that question, because your question is, who's ready to hit the ground running on day one? That's really the question. And so I want to first start off by saying, for my colleague, Mr. Barney, some of us have had experience working on a federal level. That will be me. I have actually worked for Congressman Carper, and one of the things that I had to do in that role was inform what legislation was coming out, because I was working with the people right here in Delaware, helping you with Social Security, helping you with the IRS or with housing, and that was really important to inform that process. Then as your Secretary of Labor, I was fortunate to also be involved with welfare reform here that became a model for the national welfare reform. And so I was really I'm honored to actually be in the Rose Garden when that bill was signed by the president. So one is, we do have experience on that level. Number two, there was an issue about whether it's a prerequisite to be an elected official. I don't think so. What I love about Congress is that it's the people's house. And so when you look at who is represented in Congress, there are a multitude of professions, everything from social workers to doctors. So I don't think that's a prerequisite. Number three, your question was really about hitting the ground running. And for me, one of the things that I've tried to do on this campaign, in addition to talk to people of the state of Delaware, is also reach out to potential colleagues who I hope when I'm elected I'll be working with, because Delaware has one lone seat. We have one seat, so we need to have good relationships with people. So everyone from Kirsten Gillibrand in New York, who has endorsed us, to Keith Ellison, who's the first Muslim to serve in Congress, has endorsed our candidacy and expressed an interest in helping. And in addition to that, the committees, in addition to financial services, which I think we have to maintain, for me, a dream committee would be energy and commerce. Energy and commerce is something that cuts across. It cuts across health. It cuts across our economy and ensuring we have a strong economy. That's a committee that's important to me. And then the last thing I would add is that we just brought on staff a new person, Tisha Bracey, who's in the back, and actually has had experience starting and running these offices, having worked for Harper, Biden, and now Coons, and now coming to work with our team. So I'm excited because we're ready to hit the ground running on day one. The issue of guns is probably one that's very close to myself and a lot of people in this audience, whether they lost a family member or whether it was part of their job. When I served as CEO of the Urban League, one of the major areas that we focused on was gun violence. And in that, we created the Hope Commission, the Delaware Hope Commission. And it was one of those major things that really started looking at this issue years ago. I think to your question about whether the role is a federal or a state one, I think it's a joint one. I think it's a community-wide one. It's not just the laws that we pass. And for us, we have an 8-point plan that anybody can go to lisablunt.rochester.com to read all 8 points. But I think that there are some actual things that we can do, many of which you've heard of, about closing loopholes and background checks and assault weapons. And I think starting from a federal level and giving some leadership is an important place to start, but it really is a joint venture amongst our whole community. Because healthcare is one of the issues that, in addition to economic opportunity, has kind of tracked over the course of my career, from Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services to Urban League CEO. Healthcare was an incredible and important experience, and also a state personnel director. And I thought about it from different vantage points. One, from the prevention piece. I think that Congress, and here in Delaware as well, we can be doing a better job in terms of funding prevention programs, not just for children, but also for our seniors. You mentioned diabetes in particular. I think when you look at it, also we look at health disparities in our state, and people of color are disproportionately impacted on particularly diabetes, but if you look down the whole gamut, whether it's HIV/AIDS, whether it's cancer, any of them. And so number one is prevention. Another is access. And so the Affordable Care Act, as we all know, is here, but there are some things that can be done to make it strengthened. And I think that's important that we all commit that We don't want to go backwards. We want to go forwards with people having access to affordable and quality care. And affordability is one of the key words in there. The other thing I thought about is the environment. A lot of times we don't make that connection, but there is truly a connection between our health status and the environment, particularly here in Delaware when we start talking about issues such as cancer. So from a federal perspective, there are roles for us as congresspeople as it pertains to the environment as well. And the last thing I will mention, even though you didn't bring it up, is mental health care. Mental health, to me, is one of the things that is impacting on gun violence, our way of being, and how we are even talking to each other. So I would just add that as another piece to the pie in terms of what we can do in Congress. So your question is about the health of American democracy and campaign finance. I can tell you, being a first-time candidate, this has been a very interesting process. I've been fortunate to have a father who has served in city council in Wilmington and even served as city council president. And so I'm used to grassroots, knocking on doors, talking to people. I'm used to that. I was not used to the notion that these campaigns are so expensive and take up so much time, and it was a challenge for me. And I've been fortunate that, you know, to have the support of folks up and down the state who have given from $5 to the max. For a person who's never run before, like I said, I'm really humbled by that. And even when I ask questions about campaign finance reform, and there are some things that are happening across the country that are on public financing, there are examples of that. The whole idea of ending Citizens United, which I think is probably the #1 thing that many of us would suggest is an answer. And I have to tell you, this is one of the reasons I'm running, because if we don't change this, there are no conversations about what the laws are going to be. If we don't fix this, then none of us can step up and do this who have never done it before. I didn't have a Rolodex of 1,500 lawyers or doctors or friends. I started with nothing 10 months ago. And so this is a key issue. And one of the things I would say is a solution is disclosure. You need to know and see who's giving the money, where it's going, and then hold people accountable. That's one answer I do know works, is disclosure and accountability. But for me, ending Citizens United would be, if I had to pick that one thing, that's maybe one we'd start, a constitutional amendment. In terms of what skills I would bring to this and what connections I would bring to this, well, first of all, the key to my platform is actually jobs. Jobs is the thing that, for me, connects us to a good economy. It connects to our education system and making sure that our workforce is well prepared and educated, whether you're going on to college or whether or not you're going right to work. It's really important to me that we have a well-versed job workforce. So jobs is important to me. I think part of that requires us to set a culture and a climate here that supports entrepreneurs and that supports businesses. That's everything from our infrastructure. Do we have the roads and bridges and that are outdated? Those are jobs that can't necessarily be exported. So #1, can we invest in our infrastructure? And that's something that we can do in Congress, is put that as a priority. #2, that infrastructure also includes IT. It includes the fact that downstate, many folks don't even have access to broadband networks. And so IT is important as well as part of our infrastructure. The other thing is what we do in terms of our tax code and what we do in terms of incentives to bring businesses to Delaware and support the businesses that we have. Our small businesses are over 90% of what represents our economy, so it's really important that we invest in them. The other piece I'll mention is that I've been visiting farms, and it's interesting, even the farms now are using technology. Everything they're doing is technology-based, and so making sure that our young people are prepared is really important, as well as investing in our small businesses, our farms, and then diversifying what we bring here. I will also say that what Delaware really has that is also strong is our proximity, which is that location, our trains, the access to our port. Those things are actually helpful in attracting businesses and retaining them as well. And in terms of connections, I think I have some pretty good connections. In addition to working as labor and state personnel director, there are also local connections that we have as well. So that's my. This is a really difficult question, and it sort of circles back to the first question for me about why I'm even running. When you talk about any of those actors, every day that we pick up the paper, a new one rises to the top. And so for me, I would say that ISIS is the one that concerns me, because again, all over the world, they are springing up. I mean, it's one thing to know that, we have Russia and we're dealing with the Ukraine and we have China, but with ISIS, one day it's France, the next day it's, a city possibly right here in our own country. And so for me, it gets to, again, the heart and soul of who are we and where are we going as a nation and as a world? And the ability to radicalize people, to reach out to young people, to all around the world. So to me, each of them will probably change from day to day. But if we don't attack and underline some of the root causes that are contributing to the growth of an entity such as ISIS, I think that hurts us all, and that it taps into nuclear weapons. We don't know if they get their hands on those. We don't know. So to me, it is about security and safety coupled with our civil liberties, but ISIS is the threat to me, the biggest.
This is the last.
Your question was about aggression versus leading from behind. And I think I would first start off by saying I don't think our president has led from behind. And secondly, I guess I really want to follow up on this trend about diversity and inclusion. Because one of the reasons I'm standing up here, and even through this 10-month process, has been very interesting for me. I think a lot of what we've talked and heard about recently about Islamophobia and issues like that are, I get it. And I really get it as a woman running in the state of Delaware, having never run for office before, that people sometimes have preconceived notions. And people sometimes make assumptions about you, the way you dress or the way you wear your hair or wrap your hair. And that for me, this process has been very humbling. And I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of people, a lot of people. So I take it really seriously that I'm here. And, you know, it's fear. Fear is what is causing a lot of the isms that we are seeing around the world. And for me, just the whole notion of stepping up and doing something, you know, is important. So, number one, like I said, I believe that there's a balance between aggression. There are times where we will have to not be afraid to step up and step up for the things that we believe in. But at the same time, I do believe that diplomacy is a part of what has made us great as a country. I think diplomacy is one of the things that has brought peace to places that sometimes didn't have it. And for me, as your congressperson, what I would bring is that understanding that people's stereotypes are irrelevant. We still have to do the work, and we still have to do it together, and that we need to really respect each other for where we stand, and not just tolerate, but appreciate. The same with me, like our delegation, our congressional delegation. But what I did say is that I had concerns, and I still have concerns. You know, we maybe have paused something that may inevitably be a challenge for us. So I too am also concerned. I don't do I'm the only, because there are some obvious I'm onlys with me. My answer is that I believe that peace is possible, and I start with that premise. I also believe in a two-state solution, clearly, and I think the ceasing the development of the settlements, just like ceasing the violence across the borders, is important to any beginnings of real peace conversations. And your question was also about how could we promote dignity for Palestinians. I think that was one of the other parts of the question. And I think that, you know, the promotion of dignity, I think, kind of goes back to even how people are portrayed in our country. You know, what we even see in our media, what we even hear is part of the promotion of anyone. And so in terms of promoting dignity, I think that is something that is important and should be aspired to. And then the last thing I would say is that I think that in order for us to have any kind of real peace process, it takes people that really are committed to making that happen. And that's me. I'm committed to making that happen. I would really like to thank you for your question. It's a very important question. It's a very personal question for me. It's important on two fronts. One, as a mother. I have a son, Alex, who just turned 30 years old. And Alex was actually stopped by the police around the Edgemore Community Center at about 11 o'clock one night when he was in college. And I remember him calling me and me jumping out of my bed in my pajamas and running to that stop sign where he was stopped. There is a feeling that you cannot describe when your son is stopped. So I approach it from a very personal place. Number two, I approach it from a professional place. As Delaware's State Personnel Director, it was my job to investigate the state police for racial and sexual discrimination. In 2002, before the conversations were happening nationally. And at that time, I will tell you, it was a very heavy challenge because it was bringing together the Urban League, the NAACP, La Raza, the state police, and then saying to the state police, there are people that you trust, like John Jay College of Criminal Justice, that we brought into Delaware to come up with a plan and a plan of action forward. One of the things that I really learned from that process was that there were kind of 4 steps. One was acknowledging that there is a problem. A lot of times we don't even acknowledge it. Even the fact that there's a debate about whether to say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, Black Lives Matter too, is a problem. So first we have to acknowledge that something's going on. Then we have to do the due diligence. We have to find out, well, what would change things? What are some of those best practices? As he said, whether it was training, how we hire, all of those things. Training, hiring, the culture. I interviewed every colonel going back to 1967 to understand their culture, because they have a culture as well. So number 2 is doing that due diligence. Number 3 is acting. A lot of times we talk a lot. People talk a lot, but you got to do something with all of that talk. One of the things that excites me are the courageous conversations that are happening around this country. Even the church that's on Concord Pike and their work to come out, because to me, that's what's going to help us. The civil rights movement, all these great movements were because it wasn't just that group, but it was allies that came together to move us across the line. And the last piece is accountability. We got to hold people accountable. They can't just come to election time, show up, it can't, accountability. You can't say that you changed the system, but nobody's holding anybody accountable. Laws. If people do things, they need to reap the benefits. Lastly, I would just say that the imam and his associate that just passed this week, it breaks your heart. It breaks your heart that every day you start to see these things and you know that it goes all the way back to talk radio. Donald Trump, the way people are talking to each other is toxic. And so part of the change is us believing that there are allies out there that can work with us. And for us, whether you're a millennial or whether you're a senior, to step up and be a part of the solution.
The next question.
Thank you for your question. And to your question about whether I support trade schools, as our Secretary of Labor, to me, the fact that not everyone will choose to go to college or wants to go to college is an important factor. And so to support our trades is important, to support our high schools and our vocational technical high schools is important as well. I would also really want to touch on the fact that there needs to be a connection between what we need in the workforce and what we're, graduating from high school, trade school, or college. Labor market information is very valuable to us as a state, and that's one of the things that we focused on when I was Secretary of Labor, was to know that not only are we making sure that our training is tied to that. If, for example, we don't want 50 million cosmetologists, if what we really need are healthcare workers right now. And so we want to encourage people. The same is true with STEM, or STEAM, which I prefer, which is not just the math and technology, but also the arts. STEAM is also important as well. I thought someone clapped for STEAM. There's a clap for STEAM. And I think that's really important as well, that we don't just limit ourselves to STEM, but also to STEAM, and that we focus it on what is the future. The last piece I would mention is that there are 40 million Americans that are in debt right now because of college affordability. One of them is sitting in the audience, my daughter Alyssa. I love you, but that is a big challenge for many families that they are facing right now. And so for me, college affordability is equally as important as making sure that we have that pipeline through trade school and other options. And I will say, because I have to give her a good plug, she graduated with a master's in social work, and actually as part of her job, she worked at Department of Labor transitioning kids with disabilities into work or into college. So thank you, Alyssa.
Essentially, all millennials can identify.
Yes. So my position on TPP is that I am against it. I am for trade. Let's be clear about that. But I'm for fair trade, not just free trade. There were many concerns about that agreement when it was first brought up, some of which was the process that was used in terms of lack of people even being included in that process. And so when people aren't included in the process, they don't know what's happening behind closed doors, and there's already mistrust. I think there was also concern from past trade agreements, and so people didn't see the results that they wanted to see there, and definitely don't have trust on this. There are a couple of reasons why I have concerns. One is about human rights. I lived in China, and I actually would experience things like seeing construction being put up with no steel-toe shoes or hard hat, and so making sure that people are safe is important, not just here, but also making sure our jobs are safe and that we have jobs here. The other is from a consumer protection perspective. We need to make sure that we're not receiving products that are not up to standard or up to par. The other piece is about currency manipulation, and that with TPP there were really serious concerns about whether the currency would be manipulated, and that would hurt our economy as well. So for me, TPP is a problem. I understand that we live in a global world, but if jobs is my #1 priority, then we need to have trade that's smart trade, not just free trade.